It's Tuesday night, 8 o'clock, and this is the Bob Leonard Show, and we'll be with you for about an hour. Like we tell you every week, we take the stories you've been watching on television and reading about in the newspaper, and we put our spin on it. We give you our opinion. We go behind the story and flush out the news you're not getting from the regular media. So we have a lot to say tonight, and as I tell you every week, this will be shown again on Wednesday night from 11 to 12, and then also we'll have a special showing on Friday night. I think it's 10:30 to 11:30 or something like that, around that anyway. But we have a great opportunity today because I have my good friend Sam Little back here, and Sam, as you know, used to come quite often, but he's a political consultant and was then, but now he's a national political consultant, and it's often very tough to get hold of him because he's in Hong Kong or he's in Spain or someplace working on something. So I'm very fortunate to have him here today to talk about some important subjects, the mayor's race in Flint and the mayor's race in Burton. Sam, nice to have you back.
Great, and I'm looking forward to the discussion on Burton, one of my favorite cities.
Well, let me start with Burton, and as I tell you every week on this show, what Sam and I talk about, it's only our opinion. You can accept or reject it, but we're obviously going to have our say.
We've been rejected before.
Yeah, right.
We've been used to some rejection.
But anyway, just quickly, we talked about the Burton mayor's race last week, and I know you know the candidates involved here, and we've talked often about Lori Tennant and Mayor Smiley. But since that, probably the last time you were here, there's been some indictments of...
I've kept up with them through the internet.
Some of the people... Right. At least one of the people down at the...
Well, you mean the current mayor's, some of his folks have been indicted.
Well,
convicted, haven't they?
Yes, one of them has been indicted and convicted. Mm-hmm. And the Flint Journal has come out very, very strongly in support of Lori Tennant. Mm-hmm. Now, this is unusual because in the past they always endorsed Smiley. Mm-hmm. And there's been a number of things that have come forward, and I don't know if you've read about this, but you know, here's a editorial that came in, and it says corrupt climate, and talking about the Mayor Smiley in Burton. And it says, even before Mayor Charles Smiley's friend and aide was convicted last week of bribery and extortion, trial testimony and the mayor's own statements had shown this administration guilty of gross impropriety. This is a journal editorial now. Mm-hmm. And they mentioned different things, and one thing that really stood out in a lot of people's mind, you heard them discuss it. Rizzo had a call from Smiley that he needed some money. So Rizzo's secretary went to a street corner upon which Mayor Smiley was standing and handed him an envelope full of money for whatever purpose he wanted to, and it came from Rizzo. So here's what the journal said. Rizzo's secretary never should have been able to give such damning evidence because the mayor should have had the ethics and the good sense not to solicit a financial favor from someone so dependent on city's goodwill. And people are upset with the fact that it happened while he was standing on a corner. But anyway,
well, things happen on a corner.
Yeah, especially if you don't want to be seen taking money.
Jesus.
But anyway, here's the editorial. Burton Mayor, it's time for a change, and Tennant should be it. And then some of the things it says in here, it's permissible for a political leader to upset constituents for a community greater good. It's another thing to lose their trust. Unfortunately, Mayor Charles Smiley is in the latter position with many city residents who question his honesty. And it goes on to say, of the candidates, the candidate most deserving of support, indeed the only one with the experience and knowledge for the job, is Councilwoman Lori Tennant. And then it goes on in this endorsement that occurred last Friday. It says, this is the endorsement of the Journal, Burton Mayor, question of trust makes Tenon obvious choice. It says, voting for the mayor of Genesee County, second largest city, doesn't get more fundamental than the choice before the residents November 6th. It's all a matter of who best can be trusted to lead Burton government over the next 4 years, and the answer couldn't be more obvious. Our endorsement of Lori Tenon before the August primary was based primarily on the conclusion that the incumbent, Charles Smiley, is in an untenable position because of the proven City Hall corruption that occurred on his watch. Former Public Works Director Charles Abbey has been sentenced to 15 months in prison after the conviction of federal bribery and extortion charges. Abbey was found guilty of accepting a subdivision lot from a developer for free or a greatly reduced price. He is a builder whom Smiley has had close professional and personal ties, who also claimed to have given Smiley thousands of dollars. Yet Smiley exercised sufficient bad judgment in his dealing with the developer, Blake Rizzo, that the mayor's reputation is damaged with a large segment of his constituency. Meanwhile, Smiley's relationship with the city council is virtually open warfare, for which the mayor bears much of the blame. Therefore, Tenon, a longtime Burton council member, presents a welcome alternative. She has the experience and the judgment to lead the city out of its present difficulties and get community focused on the future, absent the unproductive fighting that now characterizes public discourse. Burton voters this election cannot accept the status quo in the mayor's office, which makes Tenon not only the practical option, but a good one too. So they feel very strongly, and
Bob, is anyone listening? Do you believe that the political climate is such that Tenon will win? Because sometimes folks rebel just to rebel, and I still can't help but believe Smiley has some supporters in Burton.
Well, I think he has supporters out there. He's been there for 16 years as mayor, and he's scratched a lot of backs. For example, we mentioned last week some of these people. We showed a towing company where he gave a monopoly to, and he's his friend. They were in Las Vegas together, and we had a picture of them sitting out in Las Vegas together, and he brought him to Las Vegas, and he makes in that towing business $150,000, maybe $200,000 a year. And he gets it because he's the friend. Other towing companies want to participate, but there's no bidding. They don't even have a bidding process. And here's the Journal's editorial. It says, buddy system, talking about Burton towing policy, favoritism, not fairness. The image of the old boys network is one government should want to avoid rather than flaunt such arrangements as the way in Burton. Mayor Charles Smiley is unapologetic over nearly exclusive referrals of city towing business to his Las Vegas traveling buddy, Rachel Smith Company, Smitty Towing. So that's going on. And then here's another one we talked about where Blake Rizzo, his buddy, who testified in federal court and in state court, he gave large bribes to Smiley himself, and as a result, things like this happen where Smiley, his people arranged in a development of a land development of a subdivision, gave him $275,000 to supervise it. And then he never supervised it, but they still gave him the money. Smiley. His attorney, by the name of Hamilton, represented the city and also represented Rizzo. Represented Rizzo and the city. He was working both sides.
Well, how come Smiley's never been charged with anything?
Well, he keeps talking about that. But the fact of the matter is the investigation isn't over. And he keeps saying, well, I've never been called. Nobody's talked to me ever about it. Well, he'd be a natural to talk to if you were going to make him a witness. but he's a target.
Oh, he's a target. There's a big difference.
Yeah, when you're a target, they're not talking to you until they're ready to charge you. They bring you into the grand jury, and either you can claim the fifth or you can lie, and then they get you for
Well, what an embarrassment that would be for Burton if they re-elect this guy, and within months or days after he's re-elected, a federal indictment would have come down, and a sitting mayor would have gone on trial.
Well, especially when you have this option, and you already have this history. Now, his latest one is his biggest contributor, according to his last candidate committee return. Look who it is.
Well, it's Tom Jabron, your best friend, Bob.
Developer.
Huh? And your best buddy, right?
Here's a guy that was involved in trying to bribe Art Bush so he wouldn't investigate a case involving Jabron and young girls. And he paid Donna Poplar, who's always out there raising heck about the mayor, paid her $50,000 to pay the Bush. And
but didn't Poplar get convicted of something involving this bribery piece?
And he admitted that he tried to bribe him. Now, you know, the interesting thing about Jabron and Smiley is Smiley's been accused of taking bribes. Jabron admits to giving a bribe to Poplar to give to Bush. So now they don't have to really...
Is it this bribe taking that qualified Donna Poplar to become a political expert now?
Yeah, well, apparently.
So you take a few bribes with Jabron, and you can become a factor in the current mayoral race in Flint.
Yeah, well, and then... But you see, the interesting thing about this contribution to Smiley by Jabron is they don't have to talk about it now because he's an admitted briber. He's alleged to have, Smiley alleged to have taken bribes, standing on street corners receiving money. They don't have to talk about it. All there is a nod and a wink now. These two guys, you see, they understand each other. They're both in the same boat as far as I'm concerned. So, you know, the people in Burton have this choice. They can go back to the old boys network, like the Journal talks about, and what the evidence indicates. It seems to me they shouldn't want to do that. They should want a new start with new people. And nobody better than Lori Tennant. She's the one that broke this case open about the corruption in the city of Burton.
And you know, Tennant has also been just incredibly consistent over the years, and it's cost her dearly in terms of her political career, the time she spent, and just the personal assault that she's had weather in terms of Smiley's people attacking her. She's proved her inner strength, and now Burton would do well to eliminate Smiley and, quite frankly, put Tennant in. And I'm not saying that as a form of endorsement. It's just, what option do you have if you live in Burton? Do you want to be known as Burton, a cesspool of corruption?
And shouldn't there be some kind of acknowledgement on the part of the Burton people to someone like Lori Tennant, who has spent her whole career, and they've made fun of her, and they've ridiculed her, and did all these things to her, when she was talking about these things, and as the Journal in their editorial says, she now has credence. They recognize what she was saying was true. Now, it seems to me the guy that she was talking about is now running for mayor again. Now, do you want that situation to continue, or do you want a new start? And it seems to me, and as the Journal says, it's so obvious that you should, Tennant should be elected, because you've got to start all over.
I'm just amazed at the sheer arrogance of Smiley in even seeking re-election with all of this corruption baggage that he's carrying around.
Well, like you say, he has friends who rubber stamp anything he did. He's done a lot of favors out there. And if the people in the community who haven't gotten any of those favors, which is most of the electorate, if they don't come out and vote, he's going to get elected again. So we've got to urge people, this is an important election for Burton. Get out and vote. Get out and vote and elect someone like Lori Tennant who can do the job, who understands the government, been there for years, and is absolutely and unequivocally honest and sincere. As you say, her honesty and her sincerity has caused her trouble in the past, because that's not the method of operation with the politicians in Burton.
Well, we'll see soon, because if Burton doesn't stand up, they get Smiley again, and perhaps big indictment down the road.
Well, and out there they have 4 seats for the council. They have some good people. A fellow by the name of Nechesky is running. He's a good guy. Gary Isham, who has, I thought was, did a good job. He voted for this concrete crushing plant, and they were going to put a new operation in there, and it was like 4-3, and he was the deciding vote. The next week, because of his concern, he had listened to his constituents, he changed his vote, and they stopped it. So he deserves support now, because he acknowledged, unlike most politicians, that he was wrong in the vote, and he's now voted at what most of the constituents feel was the right vote. So you have you have Martin Bianco's coming back, and he was the leader vote getter at the primary. So they've got some good people. A fellow by the name of Hester, who's a contractor, never done any business with the city. These are good people that probably deserve support and have no axe to grind, not associated with Smiley to speak of. So hopefully they elect good people at the council, and they elect Lori Tennant mayor. But we'll see Tuesday, so stay tuned. But let's see. If you've been watching our program the last couple of months, I think you've noticed that we've tried to tell you the good and bad about the Flint mayoral candidates, with some objectivity in what we were doing. We just want to present to voters the difference that are going on, and then let them decide for themselves who they want to vote for. It was our intention to stay neutral rather than pick one candidate or the other. Well, it was an indication of
okay.
Go ahead. What were you
I was just going to say, Bob Leonard and neutrality, to me, sounds like almost an ultimate oxymoron.
I think that's right. I tried in this race because I knew I had good friends on both sides, so I defer to them. I think that they have some basis for what they're saying about supporting the candidates. So, I just stayed out of it. I just said, hey, here's some warts and here's some good things about them, But one of the things I got on Williamson about is his failure to pay the lawsuit damages to these people who had suffered so out there in the south end of Flint when their homes were flooded with sewer. And this happened in 2000 when
before Williamson.
Yeah, this was Woodrow Stanley. He was there, and he wouldn't pay them. And the law was clear that they were entitled to some kind of damages here. And he just blew it off. Then when Kurtz got in, he blew it off. So now when Williams comes in, I thought it was a good opportunity to say to these people, I'm not going to do what Stanley did. I'm not going to do what Kurtz did. I'm going to pay these bills and move on. But he said the lawyers told him that the judgments were too high, that they feel that the Court of Appeals will reduce it down, and, it could involve millions of dollars. And he just felt that he had to oppose it to see if, in fact, they can get it cut down.
Well, he almost, as mayor of Flint, had an obligation to exhaust all of his remedies and legal recourse. And when your attorneys tell you, Bob, as you know, that you should appeal it because the award was excessive, you have an obligation as the trustee of the people of Flint's dollars to take all actions you can to save money for the people of Flint. And that's what he's doing, Mayor Williamson is doing. And he's getting a lot of criticism for it. But you know what's interesting, Bob? It's my understanding that many of the attorneys who will get some of those millions of dollars in attorney fees are big donors to this Walling guy's campaign.
Well, I think, I haven't looked at them, but I know the attorneys on the other side, Dean Yotis and Tom Paps, they're good guys. They're good attorneys and very capable guys. And, then maybe they have. I haven't looked at it, but I'll take your word for it. But that's a natural thing, it seems to me, if they feel, and they feel very strongly, that Williamson should have paid these things a long time ago, so they probably feel that, they tried to get him to settle it, and he won't do it. Maybe they can get the next guy to settle it.
Well, we've been through 3 administrations now.
Yeah.
You had Stanley, you had during the state takeover Kurtz, now you have Williamson. Williamson, frankly, inherited a mess that he had nothing to do with.
Yeah. Well, that's right, but he could have settled it, in my opinion. But that's, his lawyers tell him something else.
Well, if your lawyers tell you something else, every now and then you have to listen to your attorneys.
And, then we talked about Dane Walling being a young guy who had a little experience and had been away from Flint since he was a teenager, only returning about a year ago. Mm-hmm. We said he didn't know the problems facing Flint, in our opinion, and didn't know the players, which could be, a real handicap, if he was elected mayor, in trying to deal with these people. I'm sure you might have some thoughts on that too.
Well, first of all, I've examined Walling's resume. I was impressed by one thing I've got to tell you about. It wasn't the fact that he's a Rhodes Scholar, it's the fact that he's a graduate of our school, Michigan State University. You and I both stumbled through there getting degrees. And he not only did that, but he graduated from James Madison College of Michigan State, which I also graduated from. But then it gets a little strange when we look at some of the experience this guy doesn't have, but is claiming to have. He's been thumping on his chest about his Washington, D.C. experience, his Minnesota experience, but when we really look at that, there are some interesting things that have happened to him.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that we talked about was that he said he was in Washington. He was one of the top aides of Anthony Williams, the mayor at that time. And he seemed to leave his office kind of abruptly. And it kind of relates to, at least it corresponds to, a federal investigation into voter fraud into his office, that is the mayor of Washington's office.
Well, Bob, let me just say this. It got so bad, and I've looked at some of the documentation, that when Walling left, he didn't just leave, he also said he was burnt out, that he was just tired and burned out. Well, when you're dealing with heavy problems like Washington, D.C. was facing at that time, the easy road out is to say you're burned out. But what had occurred, Bob, is my understanding that as a result of the voter fraud, which was proved, that the mayor had to pay a $277,000 fine, and Walling's taking all this credit for being a top aide to the mayor. But every time he's associated with someone, it seems like there are problems. Not only that, but when he literally fled D.C., burned out, in 2003, Washington, D.C. had the dubious distinction of being the #1 murder capital in America, and now Walling's in Flint talking about he has some of the solutions to crime. I'm not sure Flint wants that type of experience or needs it.
And now, as I say, we were pretty neutral in discussing a lot of these things. However, our neutrality ceased when we learned that recalled Flint Mayor Woodrow Stanley and his political organization was running Walling's campaign.
Oh, you gotta be kidding. Wait a minute. I heard Dane Walling in the debate say, I am the type of man that is independent. Now, but what you're saying is completely different. What proof do you have?
Well, about his campaign?
Yeah, about the fact that Stanley's or his folks are running Walling's campaign.
Well, let me read this to you. This was in the Flint Journal, and it says this. It says, what Walling has to do, his challenge, is convincing voters who are largely unfamiliar with him. And it says, part of the article says, he appears to have a powerful mentor, too. Stanley, the city's longest-serving mayor in modern times, has not made his endorsement official, but acknowledges he plans to soon. The two go back years. Walling was Stanley's first youth council in 1991 and 2, and Stanley mentioned Walling in a speech he gave at City Hall concerning Walling's schooling. Walling also has hired Charles Winfrey, a top aide of Stanley when he was mayor. Winfrey is campaign field director, coordinating efforts for Walling's headquarters on Clough Road. State Representative Brenda Clack, a Democrat from Flint, whose husband ran against Williamson the last time, is voicing her opinion too on a radio ad that started airing this weekend. And she also gave had a meeting and brought in some people to go door to door for Walling in her area. And then it says, former Mayor Jim Sharp, the city's first popular elected black chief executive, gave Walling's campaign $1,000, the maximum allowable. Then he also says, he points, as you were pointing out, he points to his work in Washington, D.C. as an analyst in the mayor's office, where he said he was one of just a few white people. From there, he went to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and served as a public policy advocate for the Urban Coalition, a group that advocates for people of color, it says.
Wait a minute. He's claiming to have all this contact with people of color, the largely African-American community of Washington, D.C., which still doesn't have a vote. And, I find it very interesting because when we research Dane Walling, take Minnesota, for example. Another state he fled when he was burned out. So this guy, when the pressure is on, has a tendency to flee because he's been burned out. But worse than that, here's Flint, Michigan, a city that Don Williamson literally took out of bankruptcy. When Don Williamson came here, Flint was $28 million in the hole. The state had taken over Flint. Don Williamson took over, moved Flint out of bankruptcy to the point where now there is a legitimate surplus, no matter how Walling tries to attack it. Meanwhile, when we look at young Walling's experience, what do we find, Bob? In Minnesota, this guy with this urban coalition that helps minorities and people of color, he says, trying to gain favor with people of color here in Flint. Well, watch him, folks, because when young Dane Walling was the check writer for the Urban Coalition in Minnesota, the last check he wrote for them left that organization with $1.63 as it went belly up, bankrupt. Sorry, Bob, but Flint deserves something a little bit better. And worse than that, guess what? That Urban Coalition was used by Walling to launder money. It laundered money and used its 501c3 status to help another organization which did not have that tax-exempt status. So there are certainly some questions about the integrity of this young man who may be on a fast track to being burned out here in Flint, because if he couldn't handle Minnesota, trust me, he can't handle Flint.
Well, let me you asked about what evidence I had. There's some of the evidence.
About Stanley, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, here's more substantiation
Sorry for going
on Channel 12 that shows the closeness between Stanley and Walling. Can you play that tape, please?
Sorry for going off track there a little bit, Bob.
A campaign ad is running on a Flint radio station that attacks the incumbent, Mayor Don Williamson. ABC 12's Joel Fike is at City Hall in Flint with a story tonight. Joel?
Bill, with 2 weeks to go before the Flint mayor election, the gloves are coming off. The state Democratic Party has paid for an attack ad against the mayor.
Williamson himself is a convicted felon.
The mayor says the ad relies on fear tactics and divides the city.
He has used rumor and distortions to attack my administration.
As mayor, he appointed 2 men to his administration who were later arrested for brutally attacking women in our city.
I have 2 people working at the city of Flint that were arrested yet, but they've never been found guilty of nothing yet.
And the mayor himself has been sued twice by women for sexual harassment and racial discrimination.
Not to my knowledge.
The head of the state Democratic Party says it paid for the ad. Williamson thinks his opponent is behind it. Dane Walling says he didn't pay for it, but he believes it to be true.
It gives an accurate portrayal of Don Williamson's own history, his judgment, and a number of questionable decisions that he's made with people who are being paid by taxpayers.
Former Mayor Woodrow Stanley was at Walling headquarters today, a move Williamson commented on.
But with the addition of Woodrow Stanley to his team, the campaign has taken on new lows.
It appears to be a busy week for Dane Walling.
Well, anyway, here we see Stanley sitting at the desk and Walling sitting outside the desk as a visitor to his own headquarters. You know,
Who's in charge there, Bob?
well, I think that's the point. Here we have Stanley as a teacher sitting behind the desk with his pupil, Walling, learning the ropes. That was enough to convince us that we could not sit idly by and let Stanley and his buddies take over the city through a young, wet behind the ears surrogate. You know, the first thing that happened to me when I saw this was I was kind of repulsed because, remember, Mayor Stanley, what he did to the city of Flint, almost destroying the city with his corrupt ways and his mismanagement. Because of his dereliction, the city near bankruptcy, Flint citizens became outraged, which caused them to come together and gathered over 15,000 signatures on the recall petitions against him. This effort united the community. And it hasn't been, there hadn't been in years a community united like that. His corruption and kickbacks knew no bounds. It was black, white, young, old, labor management, north end, south end. They all came together to throw the bums out, which they did overwhelmingly. Now here we are with he and his corrupt sidekicks again in a position to regain control of the city through the back door, using a naive surrogate, a substitute, hoping the public won't figure it out. This program of other citizens worked for over 3 years to get Stanley removed because we finally succeeded. And Walling was where was he? All these people working so hard, where was he? He was twirling his thumbs someplace.
Burned out.
Yeah, well, I guess that's right.
Burned out.
He didn't see and he didn't feel the community anger and outrage that had directed at Stanley and his cohorts who were fully involved in the contamination of Flint politics.
Well,
frankly, Stanley's corrupt practices were demonstrated in many ways by numerous close associates he had hired as mayor's advisors. Many of them were prosecuted for such crimes as bribery and theft. Could Walling be aware of these Stanley people? Could they be aware of what happened to him and still deal with them, still have him on his staff, still be working with him? What's that tell you about Walling?
Bob, all I can say is this. First of all, Walling is not even close to being naive. This guy is as Machiavellian and diabolical as they come when we listen to those ads. Today, in my drive from Detroit to do your show here, I listened to one ad sponsored by Mark Brewer, and he's a piece of work. We'll get to him later, this Macomb County bred Democrat. Remember, for me, I'm particularly troubled by this Democratic Party meddling in a nonpartisan race because I know the dollars that Don Williamson has given Democrats, and he's given them to Republicans too, because Don wants anyone that can help write a check to help Flint in here. He doesn't care if you're President Bush or you're Congressman Dale Kildee. He wants some help for Flint. And he, like many other businessmen, has spread their money around. But when I look at Mark Brewer, the cabal of Mark Brewer and Walling, I have some real problems, because it just seems like yesterday that affirmative action was beat back in this state. And when I look at the numbers, I know that no matter what folks were saying with their mouth, many Democrats had to vote against affirmative action for it to be defeated like it was. That's just the reality some folks may not want to deal with. And Bob, when I speak here against the politics of Mark Brewer and this Democratic Party that I'm so disappointed in, because I'm a Blue Tiger Democrat, a fully paid up Blue Tiger Democrat. That's a new designation they're giving those of us who are in the Democratic Party who engage in civic activities. I consider appearing on this show consistent with being a Blue Tiger Democrat, but today, quite frankly, Bob, I'm prepared to burn my Democratic card, membership card. I mean, I'm so disgusted with what Mark Brewer has done. And one of my clients, Detroit City Council President Pro Tem Monica Conyers, has expressed her disgust with the Democratic Party's behavior over here in Flint. Why, today, driving in here, I heard this just totally ridiculous commercial where they blamed Mayor Williamson. They blamed Mayor Williamson for Katrina, the way Katrina victims were treated. They blamed Mayor Williamson for the Iraqi war. They blamed him for everything going on under the sun. And many Democrats voted for that Iraqi war. And I just couldn't believe it. I mean, my God, it's a mayor's race.
Well, see, what bothers me about his tie-in with Stanley is it's kind of win at any cost, because
that's exactly what he's doing.
Stanley, listen, some of the people that he had who were convicted of crimes: James McCullough, bribery and extortion; Steve Waller, convicted for stealing money from the city; Reggie Richardson, who was head of the Housing and Urban Development. Walling was the Parks Director, and McCall was...
Walling wasn't the Parks Director. You mean
No, McCall was an aide. Walling was the Parks Director.
The Walling running for mayor?
Not Walling, I'm saying Waller. Waller.
Okay, I wanted to correct you. I knew Walling wasn't.
Yeah.
Walling doesn't even work now.
Good thing.
Walling doesn't even work now. He doesn't have a job now.
But he's got over $200,000 coming into his campaign this week.
Well,
I don't know where that money's coming from.
Somebody's going to be pulling those strings.
Yeah, but anyway, and then we have Reggie Richardson, who was Flint's public housing director. Had people accuse him of taking money and bribes and things like that. Anthony Suave, the organized crime guy in Detroit, is directly related to Stanley and now Sharp in the campaign. This guy's a dangerous guy, and I'm sure Sharp's worked for him, and his job was to keep these urban communities in line, buying his product, which was waste management, garbage collection. And he was involved here, and I'm convinced that that's what they're pushing up here is Suave to make sure he's
cutting out of here, Bob. I'm going to have to leave here in a second, I think. Every time I appear on this show, I have problems.
Well, Suave, we showed you on this program when we did this story, Suave couldn't get a license in Detroit, a gambling license, because of his ties to organized crime. I talked to the Attorney General in New Jersey when I did this story a couple of years ago, and asked why they wouldn't let Suave's trucks into New Jersey to bid on garbage contract, because they said because he's tied with organized crime. Now, this is the guy that's a friend that Sharp worked for, and Stanley has received all kinds of campaign rallies and fundraisers for him in Ann Arbor and Detroit, even in Canada, where he had some of his Suave had some of his trucks. So the point is, this guy is close to these guys, and there's no evidence that Mr. Walling will be able to withstand any pressure from these people to deal with this guy. Now, the reason Williamson didn't deal with him, they couldn't buy him because he had more money than they had.
And he bought his own garbage truck, didn't he?
That's right. So the fact of the matter is that's what bothers me. And then you have a guy like, the Giacalone thing where Stanley comes up with $7.5 million are going to give this guy to build a factory in the north in the Flint. Now, what bothers me about that is that there was no checking on his credit. His license wasn't checked because the guy in Lansing who ran the license said he had all kinds of complaints against Giacalone. No bond was asked for, which is absolutely unheard of to get, because he couldn't have got a bond. And what do you call it, when you put up his collateral he put up, he didn't even own some of it, and most of it was mortgaged.
How much money did Giacalone?
So, well, he got $1.25 million before this program caught who it was, because he was going on OK Industries. We found out that it was Joe Giacalone. Joe Giacalone is the most notorious criminal that's ever come out of Flint, Michigan.
I mean, he got over $1 million?
$1.25 nothing. And he was supposed to start building that thing, and what he did, and we said in this program, he's going to steal that money.
Actually, I believe I sat in on that program.
And he stole the money.
So he put it in a bank robbery?
Yeah, he put it in his place out in Lincoln, and he paid off, his partner paid off child support payments in the East for it.
Off the money?
Off the money that was supposed to go to build factory in the north end of Flint to hire unemployed, underemployed African-American people. They stole the money.
So, but now we aren't running. Williamson isn't running against Stanley, is he? I mean, when you say that, what are the implications in terms of Walling and Giacalone and all that?
Yeah, but
Break it down.
With this history, how can he justify almost sleeping with Stanley and expect the public to have confidence in him when he's dealing with this kind of a guy?
It seems so clean cut, Bob.
Well,
Walling seems like the all-American boy, Rhodes Scholar, college grad, wife, 2 kids in the community.
Keep in mind this, that you see, not only is Stanley involved, but his key guy when he was in the office down there, a guy named Charles Winfrey. He was a friend. He was a close associate of Stanley there. And he was accused in a formal charge in this ombudsman report I have here. He was accused of strong-arming vendors of the city to buy Stanley's birthday tickets and other tickets in group, costing these people thousands of dollars, according to this report. And then he also kind of added it to help you get jobs with the city of Flint, the vendors. And also the ombudsman charged in here that the same muscle was put on employees who told the ombudsman the implications if they didn't buy the tickets for the party, they may not have a job or they may not get a promotion or whatever the case may be. This is in this report that was delivered in 1998 on Mr. Winfrey.
When you talk about that, Bob, there were no criminal convictions or anything of Winfrey, were there?
No, but there were some paybacks and things like that. But you see, the point is, this is a formal report.
I understand. Ramona Sane was the ombudsman.
And an outstanding ombudsman, very honest, takes it under oath. Testimony is there that these things happened. And that's the guy that's running his operation, running Walling's campaign. And you have to wonder, where does he draw the line with people like that?
I know Winfrey, I knew was always a pretty decent guy, but these are some very serious allegations, and I mean, Walling seems so thorough. He didn't do any background checks on any of these people?
None of them that I know of.
Well, they didn't for Giacalone either.
No, they didn't, and the point was that's the trouble that he has, not being in the town very long. He doesn't know who these people are.
Maybe he doesn't care. He just wants to
I'm
win.
sure he doesn't care, and that's really what it comes down to. And I don't know why he would put him in that position. I don't know why he would allow Stanley and now Sharp to come into this thing, you see. And, the association alone shows me Walling's duplicitousness and complete naivety or just unconcern. In any case, his association with the Stanley machine shows his really disqualification, in my opinion, for mayor. The main matter that bothered me more than anything else, though, is that Stanley's kind of racist attitude that he manifested in the way he talked to people. And I'm sure you remember the incident where he, remember the kids that jumped a freight in Oakland County and rode up to
I remember that very well.
Yeah, and they got off up at I can't remember the park up there in the north end.
Right.
And
when the girl raped or something?
Yeah, well, and a man was killed.
Yeah.
They ran into some thugs up there. And Stanley's response, he was in California at some conference or something when he was called about it, said, those people shouldn't be up in the north end anyway. Now, that's a hell of a thing for a mayor of a city that's, half white, half black at the time, to say that. People should be able to go any place and feel safe. But especially if something like that happens, you ought to express some condolences. He never expressed the condolences. The people up there in that north side were so outraged that they had vigils for a week, invited the families up. They felt so badly about what happened in their area. And Stanley never showed up. Never showed up. And, that's an indication. Now we have this next one. And that started his demise, as far as I was concerned, on his racial arguments that he was always making. But the one that really stands out, and I'm sure most people remember, is the "Don't Come North of the River," which was a reference, obviously, to white politicians not to come back anymore to the churches up there, anything like that. And it was unexcusable to talk like that. Can you play that tape, please?
I hope by me just sitting here, Bob.
The Metropolitan. Don't come to Quinn Chapel. Don't come across the river. Do I make myself clear? We will not forget. It's over. It's over. It's over. It's over.
As part of his "Don't Come Across the River," he was talking about also "Don't Come to Metropolitan Church" and a couple other churches he mentioned. And he was directing this at, white politicians who are invited to those churches often, to sit in on the service.
Well, some of whom pimp the black vote.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people, now you take Williamson, he goes to a black church every single week.
He also helps a lot of those black churches and church members.
Yeah, and
he does more than pay lip service.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's true, and that's what happened here. It seems to me that it's another example of Walling not understanding or not caring about what's going on in the city of Flint, because I know that that a lot of the black community and the white community were outraged by his comments, "Don't come north of the river."
There's a takeoff on the Coleman Young piece where Coleman talked about the 8 Mile divide.
Yeah. But anyway, that's what's going on here. And then of course you have what's his name now, Jim Sharp, saying he's going to be part of this thing too. But let me just go for a minute to Walling while we have a few minutes here. And I know that he's taking a position And Williamson had an ad which talked about his financial involvement in the organization, the coalition up in
Urban Coalition in Minnesota. Minneapolis, yeah.
And indicated that he was treasurer and part of this thing, and that it went bankrupt. And can you play that tape, please?
Policies of the past. Recalled Mayor Woodrow Stanley is on the Walling team. Both men have mismanaged funds to bankrupt organizations. Now, they say they want to take on Flint. Can we afford to let one failed leader train a person who is unemployed with no experience make the right decisions for Flint? No! Let's not turn back the clock. On November 6th, vote to keep Don Williamson mayor of Flint, moving Flint forward with vision and experience.
Now that statement was made and based on some investigation and some records that they had accumulated, which became fair game when he's taking a position that Williamson doesn't know what he's doing financially, and he has all this experience financially, and he has a good record financially. And so now when he does that, this issue becomes fair game, and I think that that commercial was justified.
More than justified in terms of Walling's lack of financial expertise. Not only lack of financial expertise, but the guy contributed to the Urban Coalition going completely bankrupt in Minnesota. And again, no matter what you call him, whether he was treasurer or whatnot is irrelevant. The reality is that Dane Walling wrote checks and he closed the bank account of an organization that wrote that.
Here's what he said in his response to this ad. Can you play that, please?
The attack ads have started to roll out, and one candidate is going on the record in defense of his public service record. ABC 12's Don Jones in the studio to explain. Don?
Well, Bill mayoral challenger Dane Walling is calling incumbent mayor Don Williamson's latest ad, which Walling says attacks his record of public service, an outright lie. The Williamson campaign says they stand firmly behind the ad.
A campaign is not a license to lie.
Flint mayoral candidate Dane Walling is challenging his opponent's latest advertising campaign that suggests he helped bankrupt a nonprofit organization in Minnesota.
Dane Walling is getting plenty of help from the failed policies of the past. Recalled Mayor Woodrow Stanley is on the Walling team. Both men have mismanaged funds to bankrupt organizations.
That is a lie, and it's without any foundation.
You know, the fact is it did go bankruptcy. The fact is that he did have check writing capabilities.
I have a letter from the president and CEO of the Urban Coalition in Minneapolis, St. Paul that describes my role as a public policy advocate with the Urban Coalition, the fact that I had no financial management responsibilities with the organization.
The campaign stands behind that ad, and to refute that is erroneous.
And because I have such a clean record, they're out there looking to make any kind of possible case that they can.
Now both campaigns say...
Let me go to something here. Here's the write-ups in the news media up in Milwaukee while this is going on. It goes right, Minneapolis, Minnesota. And it goes right to the heart of whether or not he had any financial involvement in the Urban Coalition and what have you. But here's the statement that he says. This was in the news media up there. And it says this, and this was a criminal case that was brought against one of Walling's friends, and he had to be a witness in that case. And it describes what Walling's involvement was in the Urban Coalition and subgroups that you talked about as laundering money. It says he said that this was a witness. They connected up with the Urban Coalition, that is this free organization, Friends of Redistricting Evenly and Equitably, to get a tax deduction for donations through the Urban Coalition nonprofit status. He explained, and then it says Dane Walling was the treasurer The treasurer, he said that people were lying about that. The lawsuit took place in 2003 and went until 2005. And then it goes on to say, it says in another place here, Dan Walling worked for the Urban Coalition. The treasurer was Dan Walling, who worked for the Urban Coalition. Now, you just heard him say he had no financial dealings with that. And then it goes on to say, Shoemaker then explained, he was a witness, that since Free was not a 501c3, contributions were not tax deductible. Walling helped set up an account with the Urban Coalition so people could write checks to Free and receive the tax deduction to the Urban Coalition. That's the laundering.
Absolutely.
And then he went on to say the situation didn't last long. The Urban Coalition went bankrupt and Walling left. So he became hard to get Free money out. Shoemaker said over $1,000 of Free's money was lost. That's the thing that he was running. The Free account was closed in early 2005. Walling had more responsibilities and simply burned out. Now it goes on to say, this witness, here's what Dan Walling said. Walling came to Minnesota from Michigan in 2000, and this is what the article said, and we'll see what Walling said here in a minute, in 2002, and worked as a policy advocate for the Urban Coalition. The president and CEO of the Urban Coalition assigned Walling to the 201 redistricting committee to be helpful. Walling became treasurer, and the Urban Coalition offered fiscal sponsorship for a while. Walling served from the summer of 2003 to 2005, opening Wells Fargo business accounts and funds to the Urban Coalition. Walling monitored the reports. Between $14,000 and $15,000 was raised. Walling dated... Scott then asked Walling, now Walling's testimony, whether fiscal, this was in this trial under oath. Scott, this is the attorney, the U.S. attorney, Scott then asked Walling whether fiscal sponsorship disappeared with the demise of the Urban Coalition. Walling said yes. Some money, under $2,000, about $1,500, $1,700, he told the FBI, $10,071, was lost then. This is something he was taking care of. Free, that was this organization, also lost its 501c3 tax deduction for contributions. It says between the summer of 2003 and 2005, Walling dealt with a few members of the Free organization, and Lilienthal suggested to Walling he should pay him the $1,500 that was still in the Free fund. And Walling said he never felt pressure from Lilienthal that the latter would sue for the money. Walling closed the account in May 2005 and wrote a check to Lilienthal in May 27th, 2005. After the check was written, only $1.67 remained in the account.
I was 163.
Well, anyway, it is 163.
Thank you. And you know, Bob, in a nutshell, here it is. This guy couldn't handle money. He couldn't handle responsibility. Under pressure, he burns out and flees.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we have quickly that we want to talk about is Jim Sharp's involvement in this campaign. He's now become part of it. He said he's going to